Hello and welcome back to B-Roll Redux,
Hey, good
episode
morning.
11. How's it going, Dave?
Well, hey, good morning. How are you?
Doing
11
good, doing
episodes.
good. Whew. We got a
Hmm.
strange one today. And strange, but it's one of those movies that you definitely have to watch before you die, just because how influential and technical it was. Um it the story is great, of course. You're not going to probably understand it on the first watching, and you probably need to like you mentioned a little bit earlier, watch it with a group of people.
Right.
It's not Mystery Science 3000 quality, where it's like, yeah, you're looking for all those laughs and commentary on it, and it's ridiculous, but it's more like, being around people asking, what's going on, and starting that discussion, right? And I think that was the main goal of the filmmakers and the writers of this movie, you know, to to have those questions answered, to have
Right.
more questions raised than answers given.
Right.
And the film that we're
Right.
talking about today is 2001 Space Odyssey by Stanley
Right.
Kubrick.
1968. I was 4 years old.
Yeah, 1968, and that's what
long,
makes it,
a long time ago.
worth watching because 1968, computers are the size of, you know,
Houses.
yeah, at least kitchens, or at least bigger than a 10 by 10 room, right? You're using
Right.
punch cards and stuff to program stuff, and
Right.
they're they're less of computers that we know today. They're more like advanced calculators. I mean,
Hmm.
they can do calculations and things like that. They can adjust color of TVs, but we're talking about rudimentary stuff, right? And we're so used to having just computers at our fingertips, with cell phones, Um, so the writer, of course, Stanley Kubrick was one of the writers of the film, and so was Arthur C. Clarke, who is a renowned writer, British writer, who did sci-fi, and this movie's main story was based on one of his short stories that he wrote in 1948 called The Sentinel. And then the beginning with the Dawn of Man stuff, that was based on another short story, you know, The Encounter in the Dawn.
Hmm.
And there wasn't really a true novelization of the film because Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick were working on the novel at the same time that they were doing the film,
Interesting.
and they did this, and Arthur C. Clarke, he was worried about, like I said, he wanted more questions to be asked than answered. And then he was worried about not having enough of the answers because there was, at the premieres and the showings of it, there was like tons of people walking out of the film, and they were just wondering, it's like, what did I just watch? Can
Right.
someone explain to me what was happening,
Right.
So in the novel, he does go in further details of what's going on, what's happening, what things mean, which I'll have to give a read one day. I've never read it fully, you know. But from what I researched and over the years and find out what this movie is about, it all kind of makes sense, in that
Hmm.
sci-fi story.
Right. Yeah, the
Um,
dawn of man, I guess, is what it is, right? Man's relationship with the universe. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
where we
it's a
are.
story about, the kind of like a species, man's evolution. It
Right.
starts off with uh the dawn of man, where there's ape-like creatures, ape-like mans who are on a very barren earth. They fight animals for food. They make sure
Hmm.
animals don't eat all their food. Then there's other, another clan versus clan and protecting, water, resources. And they're doing all this without tools. They're just animals, right? until a monolith shows up, and then all of a sudden this knowledge of, hey, let me pick up this bone of this animal, and just randomly hitting the ground, is he kind of like, the thing kind of figures out, it's like, hey, this is actually like, destroying things, right? So
Hmm.
now they have tools, so it's kind of like this man gets tools, so they evolve, and then the tools later on turn against man, and then man has to use tools to beat their tools, or
With the
conquer
tools,
their
right?
tools, right? Because how the computer is just a sophisticated tool. Computer is just a tool, right? AI was meant to be a tool. Um, but then there's that question where it's like, they even raised it in the movie. It was like, does Hal have emotions? It's like, well, we don't really know that for sure, and I don't think anyone would ever, can never figure that out. Um, but it seemed like he did, right?
Hmm.
He said, the computer said he was afraid, and stuff like that. So, and he murdered. I guess you got to have emotions if you murder. You fear for
Hmm.
your life. They found out that he was going to get shut down. So he decided to stop himself from being shut down.
Right,
So that's
right.
self-preservation. The only thing you're missing for intelligent life is uh replication.
Hmm.
You got to be able to, like, a single cell organism can reproduce itself, so that's, considered life. If we find it in space, right? That's what they're primarily looking for in ice caps and Mars, and things like that. Very simple life that actually
Hmm.
consist of those, can reproduce and show some kind of, protection, self-preservation, right?
For self-preservation.
So the film was definitely over budget, but the budget was still only 12 million.
Yeah,
So
that's a,
I mean, I'm not sure what the prices were in 68,
right.
but in the 80s, that was, a decent size number, right? We've done movies in the 80s that were like, 25 and through, like, down to six, right? It made 66 million in box office worldwide, which was still considered a flop. Even though, even if you cut that $66 million in half, and that's what goes to the theaters, it made 33. So, I mean, the production made, 21 million. I mean, they doubled their budget. So, I mean, how you consider that a flop is kind of weird.
Right. I
It
just did a
definitely,
I'm
what?
sorry, quick calculation, $108 million in today's money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean,
That's still cheap.
it's still very cheap, and like I said, it still made money. It didn't make what they expected, so they considered it a flop, right? But it definitely found a cult following for sure.
Right.
And what it did is it inspired a whole bunch of people that eventually made movies that were, extremely successful. I mean, George
Hmm.
Lucas, George Lucas probably wouldn't have done Star Wars if this movie didn't come out.
Right.
He saw that, and it's like, okay, I can do stuff with models and stuff like that and make it actually look good, right?
Yeah.
Industrial Light and Magic might not even existed, if 2001 Space Odyssey. George Lucas might not ever had that desire and that drive to push things as far as he could and start that company, right?
Hmm. Right. Yeah, it definitely was a kickoff point for an an industry of films.
And Kubrick, when he went to Clark about making this, he said, he told him, he's like, I want to actually make a good sci-fi movie, because I mean, the same year, 68, when this movie came out, that's when Planet of the Apes and a few other, sci-fi movies actually came out.
Right.
But, this movie, I mean, it was like 16 months late, for its production, and you probably usually shoot a year before the release. So you're talking about like 2.5 years probably before 68 that he actually
Hmm.
started,
Right.
pre-production and some production of this film. And at that time, most of the sci-fi movies were basically like creature and sexy woman movies.
Right, right. Raphael Welch, right.
And probably the most dramatic and most kind of like maybe not dedicated, but really focused on the drama and the story and not kind of like the cheesy, special feature type movie was probably like Time Machine.
Hmm.
And so this was very different than anything that was out before, and that's probably why it didn't do particularly well at the box office like they wanted it to do, but all the sci-fis that came after it did a lot better just because this
Right,
one kind of like got that interest, and then each one of them kind of like grew and grew and grew people liking sci-fi, right?
right.
So I mean, what
And
what
people,
he did on this film was crazy for sure. I mean, the special effects cost $6.5 million of that budget. So right over half, you
yeah,
know.
about half, right?
And we know about films budgets, and what you spend, basically the majority of your money nowadays is on people,
Well,
cast, crew, all that cost majority of what you do. And there's a lot of things that special effects wise that he did in this film that nowadays are just very much quick, already plugged into some programs,
hmm,
that can be done. All these light effects and special effects when he's traveling through time and space, at the end. It's like, man, yeah, all that can be almost be done computer generated.
right, right. Click of a button, right?
Yeah, and instead he had to do, gels and light patterns and light shot through there and slits and moving the camera, forward to get one pass of half the frame, and then go back and do the same motion again, but the other frame, and over and over and over. He had to do that.
Right,
And then doing things like, which I still like, what I've always called it, the cloud tank, where you have water and they're dropping and water's got a whole bunch of production lights being shot through it, and the camera is really close, and you're dropping particular viscous liquids into that water, and you're recording it, and it gives you that kind of like nebula
right,
moving kind of like effect. And it's like that nowadays, it still looks great when you do it, but you would do it probably with CGI nowadays because people are think it's cheaper, or they're lazy during production. It's like, oh, we don't have time, we need this production to go quick. It's like, well, you need to spend a day, do some things practically, and it's going to make your film a whole much better,
right.
right?
Right, but does the audience really care? That's probably what they're thinking. Well, let's just, press a button and get it done. Uh,
Yeah, and I think that's the wrong thinking. It's like, you shouldn't be asking, do they care? It's like, how do we make them care? It's like,
right,
you want them to care. If they care about your film and how you did it, it's only going to improve the reception of your film.
right.
I think nowadays, with the CGI, that's the true feeling of a lot of these filmmakers, especially the corporation side. The big studios now, there's like, ah, man, yeah, just get it out, get us cheap. We want the money, right? Filmmakers, and look at the ones that are actually inspired by Kubrick. I would say Christopher Nolan, because he uses a lot of like the practical effects that Kubrick used in this film in his films, right?
Hmm.
And you can see how superior and actually how much Christopher Nolan's movies make. I mean, Christopher Nolan's movies make a lot of money,
Yeah.
you know. Um, the one that used probably the biggest effect from this movie was probably Inception. where he had the hotel room and the hall, the hotel room, and it was turning around. They had that fight sequence in there. It's
Hmm.
like, well, that whole set was rotating,
Right.
and that's what Kubrick did. The centrifuge for the actual main ship that they were traveling in was built in one set, and it was built to rotate.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, they have
you
a lot of locations. I was reading they have a lot of locations where they shot this thing. Like, holy smokes.
yeah, yeah, and the rotation of that set, is like, I mean, that's a huge encounter. I mean, that was a huge set. This
Hmm.
guy was jogging and the whole set was moving. That actor had to like, jog on that. Then it had to be weird, right?
Hmm.
And even one of the scenes, which I had to try to figure out, it's like how they going to do this. It's like he was standing there, and then the other astronaut was taking his nap in his pod. I guess he had it strapped in, but his arms were above the sheet, and he was in the pod, and the thing started rotating because he was walking toward the other guy was walking towards the camera, and then this guy this guy's going straight up. So he goes from sitting down, laying down, to standing up in that pod probably, and then that pod goes off frame. So I'm assuming it's like, okay, maybe he's just in that glass pod now, pushing up against the
Hold on,
glass. Who knows
hold
what he
on for
looks
dear
like
life.
then? Um, but I was trying to think. It's like, oh man, yeah, if it's definitely a real actor in there. So he had to be really uncomfortable, or as soon as it's like, say cut because he's upside down. Let's rotate, get
Right.
him back in. So there's some things that it's like, man, yeah, you still wonder. It's like, man, how did they do that? Especially in 1968, right?
Hmm.
You know, the even in the smaller ships, when in the second act, you can say when the stewardess in the spaceships were bringing the food out and they're traversing the ship. She walks from this like the stationary one, goes back, and all of a sudden just walking up the wall, upside down, and then goes into another hallway. It's like, oh man, it's like it's not double exposure because she was walked from one to the other, right? Without
Hmm.
a cut or without anything like, dividing, So it's like part of that set was moving. And then once she was past this one, the other side of that set was probably moving, right? So it's like, oh man, yeah, very deep, very technical. Yeah. And just think about how much, they probably had a lot of people on there. I've seen the behind the scenes photos of Inception and how they rotated the the hallway, and that was just the hallway they were rotating. And they had a
Hmm.
big crane, a big arm, they're taking up a whole studio. I couldn't even imagine doing that entire centrifuge, you know, in the same type of area. It was just remarkable of what they accomplished.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's for the time in 1968.
Yeah. And just things just as simple as that pin floating, having it floating, making it look like it's zero G. And it's like, nowadays we can probably do things like, very invisible fishing wire, or, nowadays that pin would probably just be CGI, right?
Hmm.
Um, but back then it's like he found some clear glass, double tape, double-sided tape, and stuck that pin, on that, and he filmed it. And the only way you can actually tell is uh, just because it's in 4K or whatever now, and like I said, the high dev, I can see the little tiny flaws in the compositing, where it's like in a wide shot, you see the floor, you see the pin, and you kind of see kind of like the discoloration of the floor behind the glass pane, because the
Okay.
glass pane's only maybe like a sheet of paper, 8 by 11 or 11 by 11. But once you get past that, glass pane, it's like, okay, that color's a little bit off on that floor. there from there. So they, or the masks where it's like, okay, here comes like the ship and it's passing a certain, part of the moon or something in the background. And it's like, I see part of the moon through that ship. Nowadays, we do masks. I mean, our phone can almost do a mask. I mean, you got a mask around you right now and it's looking really good,
Hmm.
right?
Right,
And
right,
that's just doing it live.
right.
If we're doing it through like After Effects and stuff like that, and someone's literally doing rotoscoping or such like that, it's like, man, nowadays we can almost make it perfect, right?
Right.
If you take off enough time. It's like back then,
It
oh
not having the
man,
tools to do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like, yeah, you don't have computers. You're dealing with double exposing stuff. I mean, all the backgrounds were, matte paintings, and there were so many matte paintings that Kubrick was doing the calculations. It would have took one artist 13 years to draw all the matte paintings for this film.
Well, really. Goodness
Yeah.
gracious.
So he had to hire 12 other people so they can all do it in 1 year. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it was so much work being done on there to make it look as real as possible.
Right.
And he did accomplish it. And the only thing that probably would have made it more successful at the box office is if there was more answers than questions being raised.
Hmm.
So let's take a little break here. And then when we come back, we'll finish our discussion. All right, we are back and
We're
we are
back. Yeah.
talking about 2001 Space Odyssey.
2001. That seems
Ooh.
weird, right? It was 1968 and we're talking about it now.
Oh
That's
yeah, and then there was an artist that kind of try to, I guess, get famous for it. In 2001, he actually put up a bunch of monoliths around the world to freak
right. I
people out.
remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think his career went anywhere. I'm pretty sure people know who did it, after the fact, but
Right.
at the time, I don't think anyone knew what was going on.
Right. Yeah. That was a big, yeah. I remember it didn't last very long, but it was talked about on the news, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
at least it was a lot easier to do than I know Stranger Things kind of did that kind of the same kind of promotion when it was coming out, where they kind of like built those type of portals that were in the show like all around the world. It's like, well, this one, the monoliths were only this black solid 1 by 4 by 9 by 1.
Yeah.
you
Right.
know?
Just
Yeah,
in the
had
desert.
those particular dimensions, which I think are the dimensions of the actual film frame as well.
Oh,
Or
okay.
four by
Wow.
nine, right?
Yeah. 4.9.
Um, why it was that particular size, I don't know. I'm sure the book went through there.
Right.
But one of the things that were in this movie were the insane details, right?
Right.
And that you have to contribute to Kubrick and his style, right?
And yeah, and I think that like the 2.5 hours and his attention to detail could have been. I think it's probably what led to the length of trying to get the every aspect into his vision that may not have made sense because watching it, it's like holy smoke, was it how long was that one scene where there's no dialogue at all, just breathing? It's just
Oh
like
man, those went on for like maybe 4 or 5 minutes each.
right, like come on, let's go, right?
I think the docking scene in the beginning of Act Two was like 4 or 5 minutes. The opening sequence of Dawn of Man was like 17 minutes, and there was no
Right,
dialogue. Just animal sounds. It wasn't
right,
just straight ape or chimpanzee sounds. They mix kind of like other animals to make
right,
it you know more different, right? To make it unique.
right. I think
Um,
that's
well,
directly from his mind. This that they'll figure it out. Let's just do it. It's like what the heck?
Kubrick had, that was his style. You look at some of his other previous work, The Shining, that was a Stephen King book. He didn't really go into much details of what went on,
Right.
and especially at the end where they showed the picture of Jack in an old time photo, right?
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, he kind of that's the way you do it. You want the audience to be asking questions, that they want
Right.
more answers. They want to see the movie again. So it's like, did I miss something?
Hmm.
Or they want it to recommend it to other people. It's like, we gotta watch this. You gotta tell me what you think is going on, because I need to tell someone, I need
Right.
to ask someone what they think, you know?
Right. Because I just can't figure it out. Right. It's
Yeah.
like, oh,
And
this
this
is
is
what I saw.
1968, right? There's no internet.
Right. That's true. Right. 1968. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Newspaper.
when I was a kid, there was no internet. In the 80s, we had to look up a Encyclopedia Brown for information and do reports, right?
Right.
So if you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
something,
The
you gotta
world
like,
broke
oh
down.
man, I need someone else's opinion, It's like you don't have access to like the filmmaker and things like that, You don't have DVDs back then. So
No.
you don't have DVD commentary. And even with those, you don't know if they're gonna actually give you the information. I mean, Kubrick was so secretive of what he did, all the models and various things that he did some special effects for, he destroyed everything. So no one
Oh,
could
he
actually
did.
replicate the stuff.
Oh, no.
So it's like, all those details and all those, intricacies, that comes from Kubrick. I've never seen some of his films. I've seen them sporadically when I was a kid. I couldn't go into details with like Dr. Strangelove,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I'm sure those are there, right? I mean,
Right.
wasn't there like a whole big pie fighting scene in that movie?
I've never seen that. I've never seen that one.
Yeah, I mean, I only saw it a long time ago. I remember it was black and white, and it had nothing to do with what the title you think it would do, because it was about like, nuclear war and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. Um, so yeah, I mean, so many details. Like you said, I mean, your film is long when you actually have a screen right in the middle that says intermission.
Oh,
So your film is long when you're giving the people at the theater a break. Um, but yeah, I mean, I get it, he was going for reality, but then it's like, man, I know you're building tension with those scenes where they're doing EVA, and this was actually the first film where he treated space with that details. And we talked about those exterior space scenes when it came to Alien, when we did talk
hmm.
about Alien, how you heard the thrusters and you heard stuff outside the ship and you heard sounds that you shouldn't have heard. He
Right.
removed all that, So when they're doing the EVA, all you hear is breathing and the oxygen tank filtering
Right.
through the suit.
Right.
And so, like you said, that 4 minutes, all you hear is,
Right. The breathing.
so 4 minutes of that in slow moving in space. So that didn't help the pacing at all of this film. And I think nowadays, even though that it's being a lot true and you're showing a lot of details, it's like you so much more tension and emotion could be had with quicker cuts.
Right.
You know, the scene can be cut down for sure. You don't need to see him traveling that far, and I still don't know why he didn't park the pod closer to the satellite that he was fixing. If you're gonna do an EVA, I'd rather EVA just 40 feet than EVAing like several yards. It looks like he parked a whole football field away from where he had to go.
Right.
um, but get up into that suit, show the eyes of the actor, show the emotion on their face while they're doing this EVA, and you can show so much tension and so much drama, I think, better than how he did it. And also the use of a score. Like I said, the only sounds were oxygen tank and breathing. It's like,
Hmm.
oh man, a good composer could actually make you feel so much tension by
Right.
by what they do with the music,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, the
know?
uncomfortable silence is it sometimes it's deafening. It's like I need something.
Yeah, I can take silence for a little bit, but 4 minutes of, like I said, just that kind of white noisy kind of sounds. It's like, man, it's a little too much or too
Hmm.
little, right?
Right. A
If they
little
had
too
a
little.
nice score underneath it, then you might get away with it nowadays. But 4 minutes on screen, 4 minutes on screen is a long
A
time.
long time. Yeah.
You don't think it is because 4 minutes can go by just like that. But when you're actually editing something together and you're looking at that timeline and you're putting 4 minutes together, and then you have just a couple of seconds of silence, you're going, oh man, that was a long dramatic pause I just had there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it is a definitely unique, film and unique processes that he used. That nowadays, especially, every generation since ours or since mine, the ADD just went, got higher and higher and higher.
Right.
Attention span, attention span. Now we got TikTok. It's like, man, if you don't get something done in like a minute and a half, right? It's like I'm on to something else already.
Right. You get to yeah, my attention span is like, how long is this 5 minutes? I can't have 5 minutes to wait. I need something, get that dopamine rush. It just yeah, just it's tough.
Oh yeah,
It's tough and it's I think it's really best, especially for kids,
right.
because they just need that constant and it's I have a hard time reading a book. I have to put on a I have to really think about what I'm going to do. If I'm going to read a book, I need to say, okay, I need to kind of retrain my brain for a minute to sit down and read a book because I'm not flipping or scrolling, it's tough.
Right. Yeah,
I think that's
I
why.
mean, nowadays, like I said, it's like we see that in films nowadays, and even when we're going through film school, it's like how to keep people's attention onto your screen is having that screen change. So you
Hmm.
have cuts, or you
Right.
have edits at least, and you have sounds, and you have changing of lighting from one frame to the other, right? So it's
Right.
like, you have that kind of auditory or visual stimulation that's like,
Hmm.
if your eyes are going away from the screen, you're like, what just happened,
Right.
right?
Right.
You,
Right. Right.
you kind of like trick them back
Yeah.
to get back on what you're showing, right?
Yeah, that's why when I saw the run times at 2.5 hours, I could go drag. It was like what? And then the silence. It was the silence was to me was deafening because it's like I can't handle it. You know, I like quiet, but I like to have a background noise. When I'm doing something in the kitchen, I'll have a TV show on that I've already watched, just to have that white noise, so to speak, just to not have the silence because it's uncomfortable when you don't have any noise.
Right. And I think
Yeah.
nowadays, well, at least for me, it's not just the noise. It's more like not hearing someone talk.
Right.
And that's kind of like the thing of how radio got so big. It's like, well, you're driving your car and you're listening to just people talking, right? So
Hmm.
it's just kind of that soothing area. And to me, the dawn of man stuff, that was more interesting now that I know what's going on than when I was a kid. And the ship docking, I'll give it to him because, like I say, it was only 4 minutes. I always thought it was like, oh man, it went on for 10 minutes.
Right.
But at least that the song was playing. But what got me when that I can't forgive and I can't say I do that differently is those EVAs, and all you hear is the breathing in the air
Hmm.
tanks. Because
Yeah.
even when they show the actor, it's like, man, he's not even breathing. I don't see his nostrils moving. I don't see his,
Right.
his mouth moving with it. So it's like, it's just ADR. And I think it's actually Stanley Kubrick doing it in post, him doing.
Right.
So the actor is not heavy breathing. So that kind of takes me out when they actually show the actor. It's like, okay, it's not like you said, it's just white noise going
Hmm.
on, so the
Yeah.
scene isn't just completely dead. And it is strange, like I said, but it tells a full, complete story. Like I said, it's talking about like the evolution of man, you know, starts with man first using tools. and then the
Right.
transforms into, that bone as a weapon, and then when it turns into that satellite going to act two, it's like, well, that satellite was like a, supposed to be a laser weapon. I think it's one of those Star Wars kind of like,
Mhm.
uh not the movie Star Wars, but the program, back then in the space program where they were planning on trying to weaponize satellites, right? And then how technology and our tools grew, and then they had AI, and how AI kind of like was trying to evolve in its own way, but how does man kind of like handle that, right? How does
Right.
man handle creating his own tools and then being able to have command over that?
Right. Well, in the situation we're in right now with AI, I think it's a good social commentary for now, how we're letting computers take over, and where's it gonna end?
Yeah, and that was kind of like their fear, and they set it up. Hal had like 90% or almost basically all control of that ship that they were doing. They were just
Mhm.
there to make sure nothing, if anything needed, like they were almost the tools at that point,
Right. The
right?
computer
Something
using them,
malfunctioned, the AI couldn't do it itself. It needed a man to actually do it, right?
right, to turn the screw, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
interesting.
then once that self-preservation ends, like what, yeah, Hal like, stop the life support on the scientists that were sleeping in hibernation, and then he knocked the one guy out in space, and then Dave, went to go and retrieve the other astronaut's body and wanted to come in, and he's all like, no, I can't do that, Dave. I'm sorry.
Right. Right. It's spooky, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, and they tried enough, and they underestimated the tools, right? Because
Right.
how did Hal, figure out that he was going to be shut down? Was he read lips, which I think Arthur C. Clarke didn't like at the time, but there was actual programs with computers that were actually learning to read lips back then,
Oh,
right? I
really?
mean,
Interesting.
like I said, the computers aren't. I mean, this is supercomputers the size of houses that are doing this,
Right.
but that technology was growing back then. I mean, computer programming was around in the 70s, in the late 60s in colleges and stuff like that. Because I remember my mother did computer programming class, doing punch cards and stuff like that.
Right.
So there was computers, but they weren't nothing like HAL. We are much closer to HAL nowadays.
Right. Yeah, it's a good social. I think it would be more in the movie would kind of get well, maybe it is maybe a resurgence of AI and its dangers and possible dangers on mankind. It is spooky, because we use it all the
And
time.
like I said, I don't think it's at the same fears that we have today. Today, we definitely modernize our fear of AI. I mean, even since probably the 80s and late 70s, it kind of changed, with like kind of like Terminator, right? Where AI takes over, and now AI wants to destroy man, right?
Right.
And I don't think that was what was behind Hal. Hal was more self-preservation. Hal made a mistake. I'd have to read the book to figure out. It's like, well, was this a planned mistake? It's like, hey, the satellite's gonna fail. 90%. I'm giving you almost like 100% guarantee, like this is gonna fail in 72 hours. So they go do that AVA, and they test the battery or the processor that they said was failed, and it was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So Hal made a mistake, which is human, so that's more of that kind of like the AI is becoming more human because all he contributes to, it must be human error. So was
Hmm.
he blaming humans for it, or was he saying that he had the capacity of human error? It's like, I looked at this, I said it was going to fail. That's human error, and he's considering himself human, right? So it's very deep, like I said, in those points where it's like, man, yeah, if you really think about it, you know, it could go either way, right? And that's what makes a film so great, where different people can look at it and come away with different aspects
Right, right,
or
right.
feeling different way, you know. And
Yeah,
that's why you don't give the answers right away because you don't want to tell people how to feel. You want to people come to that conclusion
right,
themselves.
right, right. Yeah, keep keep them along for the ride. Let them interpret it how they want to interpret it,
Yeah.
and have discussions.
Oh yeah, and the ending was real weird. You know, when I first watched it, I never understood it, but you know, reading more about the the novel and the short stories that come, you know, and about it being like the evolution of man, you know, with the giant baby and the fetus right? Looking over the earth, you know, people saw that at that time and they like, what in the world is going on?
Right, right, right.
You know, but you have to physically show a higher being somehow, right? I
Hmm.
mean, so that's what happened basically is like the evolution of man completed. You know, these monoliths were put in place in certain parts of our solar system to have those peak or those challenge points for man. At the beginning, it was just on the earth. They find it, tools, they evolve. The next one was buried on the moon,
Hmm.
which the only evidence of it was there would be I think it was like this magnetic force. It's like so they had to have the technology to realize that a magnetic force was coming from this part of the moon. They dug it up and then they found it. And once that happened, you know, they got a signal from Jupiter, which I think they wanted it to be Saturn, but they couldn't replicate the range of Saturn to look properly on screen. So they decided, hey, let's just use Jupiter.
Jupiter. Uh-huh.
You
Or the
know,
planet.
so to get out to Jupiter, they had to have like almost interstellar travel, right? Or almost be to the point where they're almost ready for interstellar travel. I don't know how long the actual trip in the ship took to get to Jupiter. I don't think they said that, but they did say it only took like 7 minutes to travel communications to the ship.
Hmm.
You know, so even that's pretty quick, right? You got to have
Right.
be able to have satellites that powerful and stuff like that. You know, it, pretty crazy, you know. And then the traveling through time and space. I think people back then might have got that. I mean, Doctor Who probably started in '65, huh?
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah.
But that was very popular BBC. This was definitely done, in the UK, shot in the UK. I mean, I believe he spent Kubrick spent so much time in the UK. His daughter grew up with a British accent. So,
Right. Yeah,
so
that's where he
he
ended
spent a
up.
lot of years in the UK.
Right. He
Um,
ended up. That's where he moved to and died. Yeah,
yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
yeah.
And
He
did
didn't
he
want to
die in
do.
2001?
I'm looking to see here. I'm on.
I can't remember. I think he actually died in 2001. I mean, there's a lot of those coincidences. Like if you take HAL and increment the letters, move the letters up by one, it spells IBM.
Oh yeah. Oh, look at that. He died in 1999 in
1999. Okay,
England,
close.
age 70. Well, it's only 9 years away from me. I better get busy. I gotta.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of IBM in the movie, and that wasn't planned. At least Arthur C. Clarke said it wasn't planned. He said if he knew that detail, he would have named the computer something different. So it's just those
That's right.
coincidences that things
Yeah,
work
just
out.
move it.
H to
Over.
I, yeah.
Yeah.
A to B, L to M. You increment it up by one, and it spells IBM. Maybe IBM did that. Maybe
Right. Maybe that was IBM. Right. When did
nah, because
IBM come?
IBM existed before this movie, but I don't know
Well,
when
let's
when
see.
I mean IBM could have existed.
1911.
Well, okay, yeah, yeah, that existed long before
Thank you, Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. I mean, but they weren't making computers all the way back then. I mean, well, they might have been making like the Turing machine and stuff like that. Uh, that was probably the 40 something with like the Alan Turing, code breaking machine and stuff like that. I mean,
Right. Let's see.
1910, I'm assuming they're making just, man, rudimentary calculators that are the size of a car, right?
The dial recorder, electric tabulating machine,
Yeah,
1989,
the calculator. Yeah, electric tabulating machine.
time
Calculator.
clock. Yeah, a bunch of stuff. It's
Nothing,
not
but
till
nothing like nowadays, and nothing like that is going to be in the future. So let's talk about our final thoughts. What did you think about the movie?
it was long. And it's just the uncomfortable silence is what got me. Is this like, and that's just a personality quirk that I have. It's just like I don't like silence. let's get on with this. There's a good. I mean, like I said, this, the special effects for the time are amazing. What they did, and
Oh yeah,
the
right.
practical effects is something that we both enjoy. We like to see that. So I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Would do you think it would be better to recommend and for the modern audiences to watch if they edited some things out and quicken the pace a little bit?
No, because no, I think because because people are going to watch for different reasons for the who they are because maybe they watch some of his other products, other films to see where he was, or some people just are what do they call them cinephiles, or people like us that make movies. They're going to want to see how they did it and what they can do. I think it's a good well, there's a word for it, a good it's a good place to find your calling, so to speak. What you really like about watching movies. I think it's a good one just to watch, even if you don't like watching movies. It's just a good movie, to find out where you are in the world. Yeah, I recommend. I give it four slices of pizza.
Yeah, I recommend it. Basically on like I said, you have to see it for the technical aspects of it. It's kind of like,
Right.
I mean, I'm not comparing it to Avatar, but that kind of feeling where it's like I'd recommend this movie because of the same thing. It's like, man, you got to check out the first Avatar because you got to realize how he did that.
Hmm.
It's like, man, all those CGI characters are being, you know, played by humans. Everything's being tracked and they're shooting that through the camera. So his screen sees pre-res renders of the characters, even though he's watching the live action actors doing this stuff.
Hmm.
That the 3D was actually true 3D and it wasn't kind of like what the that post effect 3D is. So on the technical side, it's like, yeah, and it's almost like that kind of same thing. It's like you gotta watch, 2001 Space Odyssey because of that. It's like, how they got that floating pin back in 68, how they got those lighting effects, and things, how they got that whole thing to rotate and how they got people to walk on the ceilings and things like that. And some people walking on one plane, and one person walking on another plane of existence. Right? So it's like for that technicality, it's like, yeah, you gotta watch it, but I mean, it's just the creative in me. It's like I want to edit it out. It's like, oh man, I can cut 30 minutes from that film easy.
Right. Well, yeah.
And I doubt no one will ever do it. I'm sure the Kubrick estate probably has so much control over it.
Right.
It's like if I was wanting to make money in the studio on that film, it's like, man, let's get an editor in there. Let's get them to trim 30 minutes from it and let's go to the theaters. Right.
Right.
Let's put it back as an actual 2 hour movie.
Right. Well, they put it. It's in the Library of Congress. Also, it got
Yeah.
selected for a representation of
And I
his.
guarantee it's in the Martin Scorsese's, film protection, in that
Right.
mountain vault.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely take it out, check it out, definitely watch it, watch it with people. That way, so those times where there's not much going on except for the same thing that you just saw for the previous minute, you can
Right.
actually turn to someone and have a conversation of what you've been seeing and what's
Right. You
coming.
go get the popcorn this time.
Yeah, yeah, go up and I can take a bathroom break in between the ZVA right here.
Right.
Yeah,
And not miss a thing. Right. Not have to come back and say, "What did I miss?" Nothing.
right,
They're
right,
still
right.
there. They're
Yeah,
still
we're
breathing.
we're we're still hearing breathing and air tanking going on.
Right.
You haven't missed anything, right?
That's funny.
All
Yes.
right. So yeah, definitely check it out. And don't forget to check us out on Spotify. We'd love to hear from y'all guys.
Right. Yeah,
Next week we'll have a special episode. We'll be recommending several TV shows to
the
check
TV
out.
show, yeah. And I
All right,
gotta, yeah,
anything else?
that's it. That's all I got.
That's all you got.
That's all I got.
Yeah, we're not going to go on for 3 hours.
No, no, not we have enough minutes.
Yeah, this should be a super long episode. Let's keep it going on
Right, a
for
super
another.
long. This is the shortest episode on the longest movie ever made. It's just
All
like,
right, David.
all right, my friend.
We'll talk next week.
Okay, we'll talk next week. Bye.